I never expected her to remember my name, let alone the way I take my coffee. That's the part that still catches me. It started in the most ordinary place possible, Evan's kitchen. Tuesday nights were always the same. I'd come over after work, we'd sit at the island, half-watch whatever game was on, and his mom would move around the stove like she had a rhythm only she could hear. I hadn't seen her in years. Not really. Back in high school, she was just Evan's mom, the one who drove us to practice and reminded us to wear jackets. Now I was 24, back in town longer than I planned, and she was different. Or maybe I was. The first night, I came over after moving back. She glanced up from the cutting board and said, "You still don't take sugar, right?" I laughed because that was such a small thing to remember. "Yeah," I said. "Still bitter." She smiled without looking at me directly. "You always were." It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't anything. Just words floating in warm kitchen air. But I stood there a second too long, watching her hands. The way her fingers curled around the mug. The faint line of scar near her wrist I didn't remember from before. I caught myself staring and looked down, folding the corner of a napkin into a tight square. Unfolding it. Folding it again. Loneliness does strange things. It makes you notice hands. I've been back in town for 3 months after a breakup that ended quietly. No jitting. No betrayal. Just a slow drifting until she stopped replying and I stopped trying. I still had her chat open sometimes. I typed something stupid like, "You'd hate this weather," then delete it. I don't know why I kept the thread. Maybe I like the almost. Evan didn't notice anything. Why would he? He was complaining about work, about rent, about his girlfriend not liking his friends. I nodded in the right places. His mom, Claire, moved around us like we were still 17. "Dinner's ready," she said, setting plates down. When she handed me mine, our fingers brushed. Just barely. She pulled back first. It's fine," I said too quickly. Later, when Evan took a call outside, it was just the two of us in the kitchen. The dishwasher hummed. The clock above the fridge ticked louder than it should have. "You settling back and okay?" she asked. Yeah, it's different. Different good." I shrugged, still figuring that out. She nodded like that made sense. Like she understood more than I'd actually said. Her eyes stayed on my face a second longer than necessary. Not inappropriate, just attentive. I noticed she'd stopped wearing her wedding ring. I don't know when that happened. I don't know why I noticed. "You don't have to come every Tuesday, you know," she said gently. "Evan can be a lot." "I don't mind," I replied. And that was true. I didn't mind the noise. The plates clinking. The way someone asked if I wanted seconds. She dried her hands on a towel, then leaned against the counter. "It's good to see you again," she said. "You've grown into yourself." I didn't know what that meant. I felt 14 again, and somehow older than that at the same time. When I left that night, she walked me to the door. "Habit, probably." "Drive safe," she said. "Always do." There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough. "Text when you get home," she added. "So I know." I almost joked about it. Almost said, "You don't have to worry about me." But I didn't. "Okay," I said instead. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual. My phone sat on the passenger seat, screen dark. I kept glancing at it at red lights, like it might light up on its own. When I got home, I stood in my kitchen for a full minute before typing it. "Home safe." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Good. I'm glad." Then another message. "Next Tuesday, Evan's working late. You can still come by if you want." The next Tuesday felt different before I even knocked. Evan's car wasn't in the driveway. The porch light was on anyway. I almost turned around. I actually stood there for a second, staring at my own reflection in the glass, like I was waiting for someone to tell me this was a bad idea. The door opened before I could knock. "Ah," Claire said, like she'd been standing just on the other side. "Hey, I can come back if this is weird." She tilted her head slightly. "It's only weird if we make it weird." I let out a breath that sounded too loud in the quiet hallway. Right. The house felt bigger without Evan's noise filling it. No TV. No half-finished sentences from another room. Just the soft hum of something simmering on the stove. "I made tea," she said. "I couldn't remember if you liked chamomile or if that was Evan." "That was Evan. I'll drink anything." She smiled at that. That tracks. We sat at the kitchen table instead of the island this time. Across from each other. steam rising between us like a small, private fog. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I noticed her nails were shorter than they used to be. No polish. So, she said gently, why'd you really move back? The question didn't feel invasive, just patient. I stared into my tea. It wasn't just the breakup. She didn't interrupt. My dad's health hasn't been great, I added. He won't say it, but I don't know. I think he needs someone around. She nodded slowly. That's a hard age, when your parents stop pretending they're invincible. I glanced up at her. You sound like you know. She hesitated, then shrugged, but it wasn't casual. When Evan left for college, I thought I'd feel free, she said. Instead, the house just got louder. Louder, with silence. She gave a small, embarrassed laugh. That sounds dramatic. It doesn't. Her eyes flicked up to mine, searching like she was checking if I meant that. I got divorced 2 years ago, she said, almost as an afterthought. I don't usually say that out loud. It still feels unfinished. I swallowed. I hadn't asked, but I was glad she told me. That must have been. I started and stopped. I didn't know the right word. Lonely, she offered. I nodded. We both sat with that word for a second. It felt too accurate. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. Probably a group chat I'd muted weeks ago. I'd gotten into the habit of silencing notifications that reminded me I wasn't really in the conversation anymore. You don't have to stay if you feel obligated, she said softly. I'm not obligated. The way I said it made the air shift. She looked down at the table. I watched her thumb trace the rim of her mug. I imagined, briefly, what it would be like to reach across and still that motion with my hand. I didn't. Instead, I said it's nice. Being here. Her eyes lifted slowly. Nice how? I could have joked. I almost did. Like, someone notices if I show up. I said finally. Or if I don't. Something in her expression softened. Not flattered. Not triumphant. Just careful. I always noticed you, she said. Even back then. You were quieter than the others. You watch things. I felt heat rise up my neck. That sounds creepy. It wasn't meant that way. A pause. You just seemed like you were always somewhere else. I laughed under my breath. Story of my life. The kettle clicked softly in the background, cooling down. The clock ticked. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door again. Habit or something else. At the threshold, she reached up and brushed something off my shoulder. Lint. Probably nothing. Her fingers lingered half a second too long. There, she said quietly. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It changed the night. Evan came home early. I wasn't supposed to be there that Thursday. Tuesdays had quietly become ours. Tea, soft music from her phone, conversations that drifted without direction. But that week she texted, if you're free, I made too much soup again. I told myself it was harmless. Soup wasn't a crime. We were standing side by side at the counter when it happened. She was rinsing bowls. I was drying them, careful, slower than necessary. Our elbows kept brushing. Not accidentally anymore. Just existing in the same narrow space. You don't have to help, she said. I know, but I didn't move. Her hair was pulled back loosely. A few strands had fallen near her neck. I had to look away from it. Focus on the towel in my hands. The chipped edge of the bowl. You've been quiet tonight, she added. Have I? She gave me a look. The kind that said don't do that. I set the bowl down. Evan mentioned something. Her hands paused under the running water. About. He asked if we'd been hanging out. Just us. The faucet kept running. And what did you say? She asked. That you make good soup. She huffed a small laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. She turned the water off. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. He's protective, she said carefully. And people talk. There's nothing to talk about. The words came too fast. She studied my face like she was trying to decide if I believed that. I don't want this to get complicated, she said, quieter now. This. I swallowed. Is it? Jaw tightened just slightly. It could be. There it was. The line, faint but visible. Inodidly you understood. Maybe I did. She was 45. Divorced. My best friend's mother. I was 24 and still figuring out how to file my own taxes. On paper, it sounded absurd. But in the kitchen, with the light low and her shoulder inches from mine, it didn't feel absurd. It felt steady. I don't want to make things harder for you, I said. She exhaled, and some of the tension left her posture. You're not making anything hard. A beat. That's the problem. I looked at her then. Really looked. The faint crease between her brows. The way she held herself like she was bracing against something invisible. I could stop coming by. I offered. The words tasted wrong. Her eyes flickered. Just for a second. If that's what you want. It wasn't. But I hesitated. And that hesitation said more than a confession would have. Headlights swept across the front window. We both turned. That's Evan, she said, almost under her breath. Something shifted immediately. Space appeared between us where there hadn't been any. I stepped back. She reached for a dish towel, wiping already dry hands. The front door opened. Hey, Evan called out. Didn't know you were here. Yeah, I said, too casual. Just soup. He glanced between us. Not accusing, just noticing. Cool, he muttered, dropping his keys. The rest of the evening moved stiffly. Conversation clipped. Laughter half-formed. I kept checking my phone like I had somewhere else to be. When I finally stood to leave, Claire walked me to the door again, but this time there was distance. Careful distance. Drive safe, she said. I nodded. Always. Her hand reached for the doorknob at the same time mine did. Our fingers collided, then stayed. Neither of us pulled away. I could feel her breath. Close. Warmer than it should have been. My heart did something uneven in my chest. She looked up at me, like she was about to say something, or like she was about to let me. My hand lifted, almost without permission, toward her face. Not touching, just hovering. A question. Her lips parted slightly. And then she stepped back. Good night, she said, steady. Too steady. The door closed softly between us. She didn't kiss me, but she didn't move away either. For a second, it felt like we'd stepped into something honest. Dangerous, maybe, but honest. And then she blinked, like she'd just remembered where we were. We can't, she said, not sharply, just firmly. Not like this. I nodded, even though my body hadn't caught up with my head yet. My hand dropped from her jaw. She stood first, smoothed her shirt, reassembled herself. There's something I didn't tell you, she said. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. My ex, she continued, eyes fixed on the pavement. He's been coming around more. I frowned. Why? Because we're not fully done. The words didn't make sense at first. You said you were divorced. We are. Legally. She swallowed. But he's been talking about trying again. Counseling. Starting over. The bench felt suddenly unstable beneath me. And I asked. She looked up then. And for the first time, I couldn't read her. I don't know, she admitted. 20 years is a long time to throw away. I stood up too fast. So what is this then? She flinched, not at my volume, but at the word. This, she repeated quietly. This is something I didn't expect. That's not an answer. Her jaw tightened. I have a history with him. A family. A whole life. You think I can just... She stopped herself. Just what? Choose you. I didn't say it, but it was there. I never asked you to choose. I said, even though some part of me had. You didn't have to, she replied. That landed harder than anything else. Cars passed in the distance. The world kept moving. People buying groceries. Laughing. Living uncomplicated lives. I'm not trying to hurt you, she added. I know, and I did. That was the worst part. None of this felt cruel. It just felt misaligned. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold. I need to figure out what I'm doing. With my marriage. With my life. And I'm what? I asked before I could stop myself. She hesitated. Your clarity, she said softly. And that scares me. I didn't know whether that was a compliment or a warning. We stood there too long after that. Close, but not touching. The almost from earlier replaced with something heavier. Less electric. More real. Evan can't know, she said eventually. That did it. Something inside me recoiled. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right. I should go, I muttered. She nodded, but didn't try to stop me. I walked to my car without looking back. I didn't trust myself to. That night, I opened our message thread, stared at the blinking cursor. If he comes back, I hope he knows what he almost lost. Delete. You don't get to use me as clarity. Delete. I would have chosen you. My thumb hovered over send. Then I locked the screen. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next Tuesday, I drove past their street without slowing down. The porch light was on, but the kitchen window, the one where we used to sit across from each other with tea, was dark. It was raining the night she knocked on my door. Not dramatic rain, just steady, persistent, the kind that makes everything sound closer than it is. I opened the door, expecting a delivery I didn't remember ordering. It was Claire. She wasn't crying. She wasn't breathless. She just looked decided. I was nearby, she said, which was obviously not true. Can I come in? I stepped aside. My apartment felt smaller than usual. She was by the couch, a half-folded blanket. The TV paused on something I wasn't watching. She stayed near the door at first, like she might change her mind. I told him, she said. It took me a second. Your ex. She nodded. I told him I couldn't do it again. Not because he's terrible. Not because we didn't try. A pause. But because I don't feel the same. The words didn't feel victorious. They felt heavy. And I asked carefully, and that means I'm alone now. She met my eyes. Actually alone. Not almost divorced. Not half in. I swallowed. That's a lot. It is. Silence settled between us. Not awkward. Just full. She walked further into the apartment, running her fingers lightly along the edge of my bookshelf. A nervous habit, maybe, or grounding herself. I didn't come here for you to rescue me, she said. And I'm not asking you to step into something just because I stepped out of something else. I wouldn't, I said quickly. Then softer, I don't want to be a rebound. You're not. Her answer came too fast. Honest. We stood facing each other now. No bench. No porch light. Just my kitchen light humming faintly overhead. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said, about not trusting yourself. I looked down. Yeah. I didn't trust myself either, she admitted. Not because I don't know what I feel, but because I do. That made my chest tighten. You make me feel, she stopped. Tried again. You make me feel awake. And that's terrifying at 45. I let out a shaky breath. You make me feel chosen. And that's terrifying at 24. There it was. No poetry. Just truth sitting awkwardly between us. She stepped closer. Not touching yet. If we do this, she said quietly, it has to be real. Not secret. Not something we're ashamed of. And it might cost us things. Evan, I said. Yes. My reputation, she added. Mine too. A small, almost smile flickered across her face. You barely have one. I huffed a soft laugh. It broke some of the tension. I don't know what this looks like, I admitted. I don't know how to explain it to people. I don't know if it lasts. You don't have to promise forever, she said. Just honesty. The rain tapped steadily against the window. I took a step forward. Closed the space. I don't want to be your clarity, I said. I want to be your choice. Her eyes searched mine long and steady. Measuring. I'm choosing, she said. My hand lifted slower this time. I gave her enough space to stop me. She didn't. My fingers brushed her cheek. Warm. Real. She exhaled softly, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. This is reckless, she murmured. Probably. Another pause. One last edge to step back from. Okay. I asked. It wasn't confident. It was a question. She looked at me, really looked. Then she nodded once. Okay. Months passed the way they do when no one is counting anymore. The mornings were still early. The sky still carried that pale gray before sunrise. But now, 8:47 a.m. wasn't a coincidence. It was a habit. They didn't plan it. They just kept arriving at the bench at the same time. Sometimes she was there first, a paper cup of tea warming her hands, steam curling into the cold air. Sometimes he was already sitting, black coffee untouched beside him, staring at the trees like they were thinking for him. It had been quiet since that night in the kitchen. After the words, after the soft, terrifying honesty. They hadn't promised anything dramatic. No forever. No declarations. Just an agreement not to step away from what they felt. And that had been enough. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharp edges. It made room. He started staying for dinner more often. Not every night. Life didn't rearrange itself completely, but enough that her spare chair stopped feeling temporary. He learned where she kept the extra mugs. She stopped apologizing for the way she liked her tea too strong. They still disagreed. He still retreated when he got overwhelmed. She still overthought silences. But now, when either of them pulled back, the other didn't assume it meant the end. It meant, give it a minute. One evening, weeks later, they found themselves back in her kitchen. Windows cracked open. Street noise drifting in. The ordinary hum of a city that didn't care about anyone's love story. She stirred something on the stove. He leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled up, watching her in that quiet way he had. "You're staring," she said, not looking at him. "I know." There was no embarrassment in it now. He crossed the small space between them, not urgently, just deliberately. Rested his hand lightly against the small of her back. A simple touch. Familiar. She didn't freeze anymore. "Remember when we almost ruined this?" she asked. He exhaled through his nose, half a laugh. "Yeah, I thought if I said anything, you'd leave." "I almost did," he admitted. She turned then, searching his face. Not wounded, just honest. "But you didn't," she said. "No." And that was the whole miracle of it. Later, as dishes dried on the rack and the night grew deeper, they walked back toward the park. The bench was empty. The world looked the same as it had months ago, but it didn't feel the same. They sat, shoulders touching. No ruse, no performance. He checked his watch out of habit. 8:47 p.m. She smiled when she noticed. "We're off schedule," she said. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe this is the new one." She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. He adjusted without thinking, making space for her weight. Life wasn't perfect. They still had separate apartments, separate routines, separate fears that surfaced on bad days. But there was something steady now. If she had a hard morning, he texted, "Bench later." If he went quiet, she showed up anyway, with tea, with patience. They didn't talk about love much. They practiced it instead. A hand reaching across a table. A shared umbrella. Black coffee poured without asking. The bench, the kitchen, 8:47 a.m. They weren't symbols. They were just places where two people kept choosing not to walk away. As the night settled around them, she traced a small circle on his wrist with her thumb. "Hey," she said softly. "Yeah, I'm glad we stayed." He nodded once. Not dramatic, not poetic. "Me too." And in the quiet that followed, it felt like enough. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?